Okay, it's the last bit of this chapter and the end of what will be on the exam. Talk about sex chromosomes. Most animals, or many animals, just say have paired sex chromosomes, including us. Pair of sex chromosomes. X and Y is what they're called typically. So in mammals in particular, and us, if you have the genotype of XX, you're going to be female. These are kind of standard sex chromosome. We've talked about the different combinations of XXY and XYY and XO. If you have XY, then you are male, right? So the Y chromosome basically determines maleness, as I talked about, I'm pretty sure, before in a lecture. So on the Y chromosome has a gene. That's two words, a gene. It's called the SRY gene, the sex determining region of the Y chromosome, in case you're curious. And it controls the development of testes, in males. Of testes. So without this SRY gene, the body will just naturally develop ovaries instead of testes. But if you get a Y, then you're going to develop testes instead. But so that's for mammals. There are other animals that have different approaches. So grasshoppers and cockroaches, some insects, other insects, they have what's called the XO system. So O means the lack of a chromosome or the absence of one. So in the XO system, females are XX equals female. But if you have X and not a second X, then you are going to be male. So it's the number of sex chromosomes. In birds and some fish, amphibians, and butterflies, it's kind of the opposite of us. It's called the ZW system. And so in this one, if you have, these are the two, instead of XY, they're just called Z and W. If you are ZW, you're female. And if you're ZC, you're male, which is, again, kind of the opposite of us. Two are the same versus two are the opposite. And in some organisms, namely ants and bees, they lack sex chromosomes altogether. So sex is determined by the number of chromosomes. how many if you're diploid or haploid. So I don't know why I did that, but haploid will be male and diploid will be female. So a male ant basically develops from an unfertilized egg. So here we got a female ant and a male ant. If they fertilize an egg, or if the male fertilizes an egg, it will develop into a female that's diploid. It's getting a copy from dad, copy from mom. If a female has an egg that does not get is unfertilized or fertilized egg, it will develop into a male that is haploid. So it's haploid and it doesn't have a father. In some species, like in reptiles, some reptiles, crocodiles, I think snakes, the temperature can affect the sex of the offspring. And I can't remember which direction. So basically when, like, say a crocodile, they will lay their eggs in like a pit and then bury them up. And again, I can't remember if it's one way or the other, but if it's colder temperature, then they'll grow up to be males, for example. Or if the soil happens to be warmer, then they'll grow up to be females. Again, I don't know if it's the other way around or not, but that's how it works. Some fish, as you may have heard, and snails, they can change their sex during their life. And they're called sequential hermaphrodites. So they're hermaphroditic, meaning they have the organs, the sex organs of both sexes, but not at the same time, at different times. So it's in a sequence. Hermaphrodites. So for example, Nemo is born male. Sorry about that. My neighbor needed me to move my car. Nemo, clownfish, is born male, and then later in life develops into female. And other fish, you don't have to know this name, but it's called protogynous or protogynous. Some are born female, and then later in life they'll develop into male. And usually, like the California sheephead is one of the fish that lives off of our coast here. There'll be one dominant male and a handful or so of females that are like a harem, basically, for this male. And if he gets picked off, eaten or caught or whatever, then one of these females, the dominant female, will develop into the dominant male. And then the other females will become his, I guess, harem later on. This is called protandrous. Again, you don't have to know these terms, but just so you know they exist, I guess. You do have to know this term, I believe. There are some genes that are on the sex chromosomes themselves, genes that control other characters besides sex, right? And these are called sex-linked genes. These are genes that are located on either of the sex chromosomes. So in fruit flies, a lot of genetic work is done on fruit flies, by the way. That's why I keep bringing it up, because a lot of the examples, the eye color is on the sex eye color determinant gene is sex linked, so it's on the X chromosome linked. It's on the X chromosome, and it's if you have white eyes in particular, it's a recessive, and it's X linked, they call it. So if you are a female, your genotype is going to be XX, right? And let's say big R means red eyes. So this is a red-eyed female. And let's say a male, so it is XY. And if it has the little r, and obviously the Y doesn't have the gene at all, it's going to be white-eyed. But it needs to have a little r. So the eggs that this female makes are all going to be X big R, right? So if we do a Punnett square between the mating of these two, the eggs that the female produces are all going to be X big R. So we don't have to do a 4x4 square, because we'd just be redundant if we just did it again, right? The sperm that this male fly makes, they're either going to be X big R or Y, right? So if we complete this out, X little r, that is going to be a red-eyed female, because it's XX, right? It's female with a dominant allele for the eye color, so it's going to have red eyes. X big R, Y, this is going to be a red-eyed. XY is a male, so that's going to be a red-eyed male. Let's do another one where the female of this is going to be a carrier. So X big R, X little r, she's heterozygous for that. And her mate is going to be a white-eyed, so X little r, male, XY is male. And we're going to mate them together. So the Punnett square we're going to draw for that. Now, because we've got two different gametes that she can make, it's going to be a 2x2. So X big R from that. X little r, half of her eggs will be little r. And the male is going to have X little r or Y. Fill this out. X big R, X little r. So that's going to be a red-eyed female. X little r, X little r. That's going to be a white-eyed female. X big R, Y is going to be a red-eyed male, because XY. And then we're also going to have a Here. So half of their offspring will have red eyes, and the other half will have white eyes. In this previous one I did, all the offspring are going to have red eyes. So hopefully by now you're very comfortable with the Punnett squares. And this is all making sense. Of course, please ask me if it's not, and we can practice. So, grab a piece of paper, and I'm going to give you just a real quick pop quiz. I'm going to give you a red-eyed female, and we're going to mate her with a red-eyed male. What's the probability that they're going to have a white-eyed baby fly? You tell me. In fact, I'm not even going to tell you. We're going to go over this in class, in Zoom. So, unfortunately, guys, X-linked diseases, it's kind of bad news for us because if we get one copy of the disease, sex-linked gene diseases, then we get it. Females need copies, 2 copies. So most are due to recessive alleles. So females need 2 copies of the, let's say, bad allele. Right? So let's just say that like little d means a disease. So female is by definition XX. In order to be diseased, she would have to have 2 copies of it, right? That's a diseased female. If a male, which is XY by definition, he only needs 1 copy of it. And you've got the disease. And there are plenty of examples of this. This could be hemophilia, is more common in men. Hemophilia is where you lack a protein that helps your blood clot. So if you get cut, you just bleed and bleed and bleed and bleed until you die. So that can be pretty serious. Red-green color blindness. Again, more common in men. And there's a disease called muscular dystrophy, which is it's a progressive disease that your muscles get weaker and weaker, and you start losing coordination. So, not a good disease. Again, X-linked, so females kind of, I don't want to say luck out, but it's going to be less common with them. And this kind of thing is the reason why inbreeding is so bad. Because if a sister and a brother, let's say, mate, and she's a carrier, he's got 1 copy of it, their child is like guaranteed to have, almost guaranteed to have the disease. Well, actually, he will be guaranteed to have it if, if the mom's diseased, then the son is guaranteed to have it. Anyway, the frequency of these diseases goes up as inbreeding happens. So if you look at, oh boy, what was his name? I think he was a Spanish king, and I can't remember his name, but he had all sorts of deformities because they wanted to keep the bloodline, royal back in the day. And I'll put a picture up in the video of this guy. He had all sorts of deformities and mental problems and behavioral problems, and all because of inbreeding. Okay, that's it for the chapter, and see you next time.